Professor Emeritus Alex Norman from the Luskin School of Public Affairs at UCLA, graduated from Hillside High School in 1949. He then joined the Air Force and went on to serve in Korea. And after the Air Force, he used the GI Bill, and eventually he graduated from UCLA with his doctorate in social work. And Alex has worked with the EEOC office. He has been a community activist. He has worked with local city councils. He has served on boards. He has worked with diverse communities. Here he is with his EEOC boss and mentor. Alex has been married to his wife, Margie. He has a son and also a daughter, discovered late in life. But this is going to be the story of a man who has had a fascinating journey, and I hope you will enjoy hearing Alex's story as much as I have, and we look forward to doing that. So let me welcome the Professor Emeritus from UCLA, and I know you're going to talk more about that, but it's just awesome to have Alex here with his many years of experience in the field as an educator, an activist, a husband, a father, a community person. And so Alex is going to give us, based on some specific questions that I'll ask, like a hint into some of the things that he has experienced and some of the advice or encouragement he'd have for his posterity, for the generations to come. So, Alex, welcome. And we're going to start with this broad category of origin and identity. And so the question is, how do you introduce yourself to future generation? And who are you beyond Professor Norman, beyond Dr. Norman, beyond this activist that like a lot of people have come to know?
Well, I think the one response answers all those questions. Neil deGrasse Tyson has heavily influenced me, the astrophysicist. I'm on his podcast. And one of the things that he explained is that when this universe came into being, everything that followed included all of the elements of the universe, and that we, in fact, are stardust because we evolved out of the early gases and sediments that occurred when Earth collided with whatever it collided with, and life sprang. So I consider myself a child of the universe and a citizen of the world because I don't accept nation states. I adhere to it because I have to, but I see the world as one, and I see me as part of the universe.
So let me ask you, do you have any nicknames or identities that matter to you? And as a follow-up to that, when did you first feel like yourself?
Oh God, my only of course, my family called me Junior forever. I used to try to get my mom to call me Alex. I told her, nobody calls me Junior, Mama. Everybody calls me Alex. She called me Junior to the day she died. My brother and my sister called me Moon. Yeah, and but beyond that, I never had any other nicknames. Like AJ, they didn't call me AJ as in the South, we get initialize everything. Um, but when I really came into my own being was in the 70s. I think I had time enough at that point to kind of slow down. I'd been running and developing and trying to achieve and prepare myself. And so by the 70s, I had a chance to become more introspective. And the thing that helped me was the practice of Tai Chi and the Chinese practice of Qigong medicine. And then I began to look inward instead of outward. And I think that's when I began to understand who I was, that I was this person who, for whatever reason, was committed to social justice. And wherever I saw injustice, I had to do something about it. Either I had to speak up or I had to intervene. Some action had to occur. And I think that came really from one of the early teachings of my mother, who said that whenever you see somebody doing something to somebody, you have to do something about it. You just can't stand there and let it happen. You have to do something. And I think I carried that from the micro level to the macro level, that not only you do it individually, but you have to adapt that to society. And I think at that point, I began to see myself as this kind of a peaceful warrior,
Mm.
that I was working to achieve a peaceful outcome for people. And I think that's what got me involved in the Arab-Jewish dialogue conflict.
And I'm sure you'll talk about that later on. But let's talk about some of the early influences. Who are some of the people, places, or moments that helped to shape you to become the man that you are today?
Well, as I mentioned, my mother, who was the parent with me longest. My father died when I was 9. So I remember little of him because I didn't really grow up with him to develop the memories like I did with my mother. Um, and so my mother was really the anchor in my life, period. I had a stepdad who was important in my life, but I probably got a lot of messages from the culture. Do you know the song John Henry? John Henry was a steel driving man. He was working on the railroad. There are many songs about him. He was this fictional character, but he was real. And he was willful, he was strong, and he was battling against the machine that laid railroad spikes. And they said that no hammer rang like his because he was the top steel driving man. And so when they brought the machine in, he competed against the machine and won, but it cost him his life. And that stuck with me because everywhere I went in my community, somebody was singing a song about John Henry,
Mm.
particularly the men. So I would think that the men around me in my community, my stepfather, who always told me, hey, nothing happens after midnight, so go home. If you haven't achieved anything by midnight, it ain't gonna happen. Go home, get some sleep.
Mm.
So he taught me to kind of be realistic. He was a farmer, uh, and he was a man of the earth. He always had a garden somewhere, no matter where we were, whether we were in Atlanta or Durham, North Carolina. We still had gardens, and also got instruction from the World War II veterans. They came back. They had been everywhere. They had seen things. They were regaling stories and talking about how they had changed because they had been places where they had been accepted. And so it began to fill my head with intentions. Many of them were unconscious, but as I reflect on them, it really guided me. A lot of it guided me in being the person who I am. So my earliest recollection of being a man was, that you worked. You know, that's the first thing you did. You worked and you provided for your family and you protected your family. And then, of course, as I got to be a teenager, I got into the whole thing about men and sex and how you're supposed to chase girls and stuff like that. But the substance of my manhood was really based on my stepdad, my uncles, my cousins, my community,
Mhm.
people in the neighborhood.
So let me ask you something, Alex. You mentioned that your stepdad would say, like, nothing happens after midnight. If it
Yeah.
hasn't been accomplished yet, then go home, go get
Yeah.
some rest. Are there any stories from back then that still guides your way of thinking, guide your worldview that like you can recall?
Yeah, I guess again, I'd have to go back to my mother, you know, because she was the first one to give me some instruction about race. I grew up in the segregated South under an authoritarian rule, and it was during the time when there were all the lynchings. The um, Jonesboro boys were lynched. The Ashboro boys were lynched. They had all kinds of lynching. And we took two newspapers, the Pittsburgh Courier, which gave you a national outlook of what was happening to Black people, and the Atlanta Daily World, which gave you a local view of what was happening to Black people. And all of it was bad as far as I was concerned. And my mom walked by one day. I was looking at a paper where it was all about lynching. And she said, Junior, all white people aren't bad. Well, that didn't comport with what I was seeing, okay,
Mm,
because I didn't see anything good happening in the white world. And in those days, we were completely segregated. So I didn't interact with white people until when I went in the Air Force. I was 18 years old. So that was one of the things that stuck with me, that if they're not all bad, sooner or later I'm going to meet one that's okay.
mm,
Now, that's another story because it took me 20 years to meet that person, okay, that I thought, hey, this is the first okay white person that I've ever met. And that was when I was in the Air Force. But that's one of the things that got me.
okay.
Um, the other was that to always do my best. And that was a teacher in my junior high school who told me that I was I was smart. I made the honor roll, and he told me I was smart. I never thought about whether I was smart or whatever, But he said to me that that was good and I should always do my best. Now, I didn't know what that meant, but those are the two things that kind of stuck with me. The one about justice, about don't hang out all night long, you know,
Mhm.
and to do your very best.
Awesome. So let's talk about turning points. And uh, just before you address this question, what are some of the biggest turning points or crossroads in your life, and how did they change your direction? Um, I want you to just speak a little, well, just mention for your audience, because you talked about joining the Air Force. Just in passing, and I'm sure there will be opportunities with other questions for you to develop the story of having served, but you are a veteran. So
Mhm.
just make mention of when you got in the Air Force, where you served, and like any offshoot from the Air Force. And it might be related to the question about the turning points or crossroads in your life
Mhm.
and how it changed your direction.
Well, the Air Force did change my whole life. First, I was underage. I was 17 years old when I applied. So my mother and my stepdad had to sign for me to go in. But as I told you, I lived in a pretty segregated environment, both in Atlanta and in Durham, North Carolina. And so my first interaction with white people was when I was in the Air Force. And what it did for me, it did two things for me. The Air Force really opened up a whole vista for me, but it also put me into a situation where I saw that I was smarter than a lot of white guys, you know, in my outfit. And somehow we had gotten that sublimated message that white people were smarter than black people. And so I go in the Air Force and I find out that I am one of the squad leaders. So the Air Force projected me into a leadership position. It was one good thing. It also gave me an opportunity to travel. I went from Texas to Mississippi to Ohio to Japan to Korea to California. I mean, I went all over as a result of being in the Air Force. Saw a lot of things, met a lot of people, and it changed my view of who I could be. That I didn't have to be this little boy in Durham or Atlanta, where most of my childhood friends stayed. They never left, you know. So it not only opened my vista, but it also created an opportunity for me to go to college. Never would have gone to college had it not been for the GI Bill. And the GI Bill allowed me to see other and interact with other mentors. My first mentor in social work was a woman, Lillian Collins, and she said to me, "Those whom the gods would destroy, they first make mad." And that stayed with me because she told me that I always had to keep a cool head, that I was going to be in situations where I could easily get get lost in my passion or my anger. Mhm. But she said, those whom the gods would destroy, they first
Mm.
make mad. And so as I look at that, I mean, those were things and then that was one thing happened in social work, then allowed me to go to Philadelphia and to practice as a psychiatric social worker and to come to California. So one thing opened up everything else, and the rest is history.
Hmm.
To a
So,
professorship to retirement, all of it.
so Alex, and it's funny you talk about retirement because I don't know if you have ever retired, but let me ask you, what risk did you take and what have you left behind?
Well, the risk I took was uh, the courage to take a chance. I never thought much about failure as I thought about achieving. So if my focus was on achieving, even if I didn't achieve, I didn't see it as a failure. I saw it as not achieving. So you got to do better the next time because Mr. Calloway told me, that I should always do my best. So every time I came out of the chute, I should be doing my best, no matter what or where I was or what job I had, I should put forth my best effort. And that really stuck with me because it was true. Because the persistence in constantly doing my best means that I left all my failures behind. I didn't carry any failures with me. I didn't have any of that baggage of I woulda, shoulda, coulda, because I achieved what I wanted. And and I guess that's one of the things that also helped me to want to be on the leading edge. Not that I was snub or a nerd, but I just wanted to be on the leading edge because that's what the excitement was for me. Still,
Mhm.
it's where the excitement is for me.
So, Alex, let's move on then to talk about manhood, responsibility, and values. What did being a man mean to you at different ages, and I could say stages, and how had that definition evolved for you?
Mm. Well, as I was mentioning earlier, being a man to me was a reflection of what I saw around me. And I saw my father working. My father made $4 a week, which kept us from getting government surplus because he was employed. So the kids who were on relief had better clothing than we did, you know. But work was important. So that became important to me. He was also a protector. I mean, he was the one that my mother served first. You know, the dinner table, she would serve daddy, and then she would serve everybody else. So there was a respect there.
Mm-hmm.
So respect and work uh, came with and protector of the family. You know, he was a protector of our family, and he was. I'm sure it must have been tough for him because he was a World War I veteran, but he was a truck driver, and that's the most that he could do at that time. When most black men were either chauffeurs or some kind of domestic, he had a regular job. So that was one of those things that stuck with me. And the other was that I was to be somebody. Now, whatever that means, or whatever that meant to him, well, one, it meant to him, since I was smart, I was going to be a doctor because the doctors drove the biggest cars. You know, they had the biggest houses. They had the best clothes. Their children, were clothed better. So that to me was shaping my manhood. And of course, it changed as I grew older. I found that being a man meant also finding out who you were, and developing your own truth.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me happened as I began to enter my 20s. Because when I was in the Air Force, things happened that caused me to change my whole life. I was sitting in a dugout watching a movie, and it was raining, and the dugout was all muddy because it was cut into the hillside in Korea. And I'm watching this movie called The Next Voice You Hear. And the movie was talking about the next voice you hear will be that of God. And God was saying that he was dissatisfied with all the conflict in the world, and God wanted everything to be peaceful. And so, all over the world on that one day, everybody in the world heard the voice of God in their own language. And I vowed at that time that if God let me out of Korea unharmed, I would work for peace and justice. And that guided me. That made me the peaceful warrior that I am today. Started me on that path. And of course, each time I had an opportunity to prove myself, I became even more convinced that that was a way for me to go.
So how then did your expectations around work, fatherhood, partnership, or leadership shift over time?
I think it made me more responsible. Um, in uh, my early life, fatherhood was working for your family. So I spent a lot more time out working for my family than I did in building my family relationships. I look back on that now, and if I had it to do all over again, I'd spend more time
In
with
and
the
out.
family than I did building the profession. But at that time, that was the my idea of who a father was. A father
Mm-hmm.
was somebody who went out and who would bring home the bacon, and the wife could stay home and raise the kids. And then I began to see that raising kids was a partnership, so that the wife became just as important as the husband in the family. Father and mother working together. and I had a special needs son. So that even brought us closer together in our partnership to try to
Mm,
figure out how are we going to be parents of this kid who has special needs and will have special needs for the rest of his life.
right.
Yeah. Um, I think that the I began to mellow in my second marriage because I realized that there was a need for spending more time with my family than I did in my first marriage. Now, it also could be that I'd also prepared myself so that I didn't have to work as hard or do as much outside to
Right.
develop my profession. Because when I married, I had my doctorate, you know, so I didn't have that to do. I could relieve myself of that and also became more spiritual at that time.
All right. So we're going to go on then to talk about struggles, resilience, and healing. What was the hardest season of your life, and what helped you to get through it?
You know, Jim, that's a hard one because what I considered hard in the beginning wasn't hard at all. I remember thinking that I didn't know how I was going to go to college. And yet a man over at the Morris Brown College, who was the bursar, said to me, you know, if you get your GI Bill, I will let you enter. I'd give you admission until your checks came in if you promise that you're going to pay your tuition. Now, that was hard for me because I was in Atlanta, Georgia at that time, and I had a job paying 75 cents an hour. And the foreman of this paper company had a 15-year-old kid, boy, who came to work during the summer. And all the black men around there were calling him Mr. Bobby. I could not call him Mr. Bobby. I refused to call him Mr. Bobby. So that was a challenge to my manhood, to my personhood. And I thought that was the hardest thing for me. And Mr. Jesse at Morris Brown College, the bursars, gave me a way out. He
Mm,
said, hey, you know, you can enter Morris Brown College on the GI Bill and pay me later. And I thought that that might be the hardest thing that I had to overcome because everything else was just a problem until I got lung cancer. And when I got lung cancer at 89, I had to decide, do I take treatment or is this it? Do I not take treatment and let it ride out and just go ahead because I've had a great life? You know, I've achieved all that I thought I should have achieved. I, I'm satisfied with what I've done. So maybe this is time to leave. And I decided, I told my family, and they all said, hey, you know, well, you can beat this. You know, I mean, the support of the family is what got me to change my mind about taking treatment.
mm.
So I had the surgery to remove the the lobe of the left lung where the cancer was, and recovered.
And how old are you now, Alex?
I'm now 94.
So you have 5 years in from that tough season in your life when you had to make that decision.
Well, actually, it was four. It was 4 years because it came back in a different area.
Hmm.
And that's when I really decided that, hey, you know, I'm just going to let it ride at this point, you know, because, you know, it's almost like I did everything I could for the first one and it comes back. Maybe that means that's a sign. But the thing is, the oncologist saw that in me and she said, you know, given your biological conditioning and your biological age, we can beat this. I can cure this. And she changed my mind.
Hmm.
And so I took chemo and radiation. and got over it. So last Wednesday, I did my CAT scan and my MRI, and for the last 6 months, I've been clear.
Wow. So who stood by you during these challenging times, and what practice or practices, whether it be faith, mentorship, therapy, community, what sustained you? And what did you learn about asking for help in all of this?
I guess the thing that stood by me was my family and my friends. Um, my faith sustained me from the time that I was in Korea in that dugout
So,
watching that movie, to 1970s when I had a disagreement with the bishop, the Episcopal bishop. I was on the bishop's commission for renewal. I was Episcopal church. And I was a senior warden at the Christ the Good Shepherd Episcopal Church. So I was a practicing Christian. But when I saw the politics involved, I realized that I didn't need a bishop or a priest to intercede between me and my maker. I could have that relationship myself. And that was one of the things that sustained me, that knowing that the moral values that I had instilled in me from my faith, I could sustain without having to refuel that by going to church and tithing. I could give to people, give to causes as part of my tithe, and I could give of my energy as part of my faith. So my faith was not so much in the church or in Christ as it was in me, that I am the universe and God is in me. So therefore, my faith is in God, but God is that part of me. If you understand what I'm saying, that I didn't compartmentalize God from Alex. So
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 I
I would
think this,
think family and the belief in myself.
thank you. This is a good,
I would say that in my youth, that is, before I went into the service, I was, I mean, I was doing what most kids would do in their community. I went to school, I was in the Boy Scouts, I hung out with guys on the corner, I played little sports, and I really never thought that much about community
mm,
because the Black community was the only community I knew, you know. So I didn't have a sense of how that community developed or anything like that. I knew that some of the people who were named for the school, Booker T. Washington, we knew that he had a slave existence and that he rose from that. Frederick Douglass, we knew that he was a former slave and a guy turned abolitionist. And Harriet Tubman, we knew that she was the Moses. That's what we called her because she led her people out of the dungeon to the promised land. But I think my sense of community really developed. I got outside of the community when I was no longer in the Black community and did not have the supports and the incentives from the broader community. I realized the importance of community and being in the community and getting support from the community. So when I got out of the service, instead of going to California, I went back to Georgia, a segregated community with friends that I'd grown up with people that I knew. And I began to accept the responsibility for helping to build that community. And that was during my college years
Mm.
when I became active as a student on campus in the civil rights movement. And that, of course, brought me into contact with Whitney M. Young Jr., who became my mentor um, and an educator, because I went to school at Atlanta U when he was the dean, and he remained my mentor until he died.
So your social work roots run deep, and I say that as a board member of the National Association of Social Workers. Whitney Young is one of our iconic figures, and
Yeah,
so it's just good to know that like you actually have that
yeah,
association and connection, and value him as a mentor.
yeah. Well, he told he was he was a larger than life figure for us because he had this sense of comfort. It's like when Whitney walked into the room, he owned it, you know? It's like he had a respect in the way he carried himself that it just drew your attention to him.
Hmm.
And and so I remember he told me, hey, when you graduate from this school and you get out into the community, remember who you are and remember why you are there, what you came for, because they're going to offer you stuff that will get you off your track. But remember, you're there to for social justice. So he was one of those who helped me to uh, realize my responsibility for building community,
Hmm.
along with a local attorney, Don Hollowell, who was a civil rights leader in Atlanta. So my sense of community then began to be seen as a community, as a nation builder, that we needed to build a nation within the United States because race was endemic to the United States. And we're always going to be in this white supremacist um, existence. So we needed to build our own nation. So I began to get interested in Black community. And the Black Power movement had an impact because I realized at that point that the way that we had gotten to where we were was through the Black church. I mean, I went to an AME school, Morris Brown. He was an activist pastor, and built a school in 1882. This is during Reconstruction, they
Right.
built this school. And so building community institutions became important to me. And so I inculcated that into my practice. And instead of going psychiatric, I went into CO, even though I'd been trained as a clinician. I ended up going into the community because of the impact that people like Whitney Young and Don Hollowell had on me, and
So,
uh, and the Black Power movement
mhm.
that caused me to turn my dissertation into looking at the whole issue of Black separatism. So that was a battle because the university wanted me to do a statistical study, and I wanted to follow a movement. And with the Black United Fund movement, and they wanted me to do this study. And I said, no, I want to do a participant observation study of the Black United Fund, which was a reaction to the lack of United Way funding Black agencies after the riots. So,
So Alex, let me ask you then, having said that, What are some traditions or institutions you fear that we might be losing as you continue this thought as to your community um, roots, as it were? I mean, community organizing roots and the influence of the Black Power movement, of the attorney you mentioned, of Whitney Young. What are some of the institutions you fear we might be losing, and is there hope of restoring them?
I'm not sure at this point because I don't know what's happening in the South. But one of the things that I felt that we needed was more self-help institutions and self-help organizations. So that's been the focus of my study, and that's been the focus of my community building, to create the kind of institutions. Um, the Black church was so important to us in the beginning. I think we're losing that. The historically Black universities and colleges that used to graduate 90% of our graduates, we're losing that because integration took the best teachers as well as the best students out of that system. And we're not pouring back into that system, into the system to build that. And I think that's important, particularly as you look at what's happening with Trump. I mean, he's trying to dumb down education and trying to rewrite history. So our institutions need to be there to record what is actual and what is there. And I think that's a part of the legacy that we need to leave behind.
So, and by Trump, you're talking about President Trump, who was the 45th and the 47th President of the United States, Donald Trump. Um,
Yeah.
uh, so let's move a little then to talk about some of the changes that you have witnessed over time, cultural changes, technical changes, things are in the economy, gender and race issues, as well as politics. So here's the question I'm asking. What are some of the biggest changes you have experienced in your lifetime, and how has this affected your sense of community?
I guess the greatest impact was computers.
Hmm.
Uh, there's no that the computers uh, had the greatest impact. The computers freaked me out in a variety of prior to the computers. I mean, as I was saying, the computer was probably the most influential of the changes because it really freed me up to be able to write and publish in such a way that it wasn't as burdensome because I could store the material, I could get back to it. It also gave me much more of an opportunity to interact with people who were studying the impact of the computer in the future. And so and that I think is what took me to the futuristic ed. I began to be futuristic, and I was dealing with futurists, and we were having conferences about what was going to happen in the future. And I was really excited about it. Of course, I carried it back to the school and said, hey, there are going to be these things happening, and we really need to learn a language called computer. And so we ought to be installing computers in our school to help our students because we're going to be using this thing called a word processor more and more. And of course, they told me, no, you go somewhere, and so about 2 or 3 years later, they began to bring computers in, but I already had mine set up at home. So that was the one thing that really changed my life. The other was the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act, because that really made us citizens. The Voting Rights Act really was the first codification of the acknowledgement that Black people were citizens in this country with all the voting rights that any other person had. That got me more engaged in community because I became interested in voter education and increased my activism. So my activism has increased each year, each era, with whatever changes have occurred or whatever cultural changes have occurred. Because the same thing happened around the gender revolution. I freed up women, it freed up gays. I mean, the whole society opened and created for me a hope that could be a broader community of social activists based on social justice, not on gender or ethnicity or race, but that we could come together around the fact that we wanted justice for each other. So my
And we're human.
community began to expand, and I think that culturally that shifted. It shifted from integration to desegregation. So if you just took the barriers down and allowed people to interact as they wanted, then they would build a community of their own. I think that's the most impact that I've had, both culturally, politically, because I became more politically active as a result of Civil Rights Act. I had a job as the deputy of investigations for the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So for 2 years, we opened up the office around employment discrimination complaints. And I got a chance to investigate some of the early cases and help to write the briefs that got gender discrimination broken, age discrimination broken, all those here in California. So with each one of the changes, instead of restricting my activism, it's expanded it.
So, Alex, you are 94 this year.
Mm-hmm.
You have seen a lot, you have experienced a lot, you have heard a lot. Let me ask you to do this comparison. Think of something that was better then and something that is undeniably better now. Something that was better then and something that is undeniably better now.
Well, I think freedom of travel, one. When I came to California, I had to use a green book that tells me where to stay as I left Philadelphia to get through to Atlanta, New Orleans, Texas. So just travel and accommodation, public accommodations is much better. I think that employment opportunities definitely are much better now than they were.
Hey, Alex, say something about the Green Book, because I think there is like a book written. There might have even been a movie about the Green Book, but just for a lot of people who might not know, when you mention the Green Book, what are you talking about? Just
Yeah.
explicate that
Yeah.
for a
Well,
minute.
during the years when we were such a segregated society, when Black people traveled, they stayed in other Black people's homes. So, and there was the same, not just for the individual, but for our athletes. If our athletes were on various teams, when they traveled, they couldn't stay in the hotel with the white players. They had to stay in somebody's home. And what happened was that this man in Chicago decided that as a public service, he would cover the United States in places where it was safe for Black people to lodge. And he put this in a book called The Green Book. And if you go to the museum in Washington, D.C., there is the Green Book
Right.
with the automobile there that tells you all about how going from one place to the other, we had to consult that Green Book and for our own protection, because there were many um, um, towns that were sundown towns, and Black people were not supposed to be in those towns after sundown. And if you were traveling and you were caught in one of those towns, it could mean your life. So the Green Book really saved the lives of a lot of Black people and encouraged a lot of Black people to travel.
So one could see the Green Book as the where to go book.
Yes.
Green for go, like this is where you go.
I never thought of it that way, but that's it.
Yep,
That's the green light.
and you're speaking, that's walking to, oh, I mean, the idea is, yeah, this is where you go.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
the go-to book.
It's a go-to book. Yes.
So let's talk then a little about success, happiness, and legacy. First of all, how do you define success? How do you define happiness? And how do you define legacy? And has those definitions evolved over time for you?
Yeah, because I used to think the legacy was leaving something behind. But to me, my legacy is in what I do. An activist, your legacy is what you do. I guess that's kind of like Buddhistic too, I guess. You are doing rather than being. Um, I never really thought of leaving something behind,
Mm,
but I felt it was necessary to leave a record uh, behind, but not because it was a legacy, but just to inform people, because that's what happened with me. I happened to be able to go to England at an early stage in my career and interact with Africans and Caribbeans uh, who had different stories to tell and introduced me to different books. That's the way I got to Walter Rodney's book.
mm,
Was a, a buddy in London gave me this book. He said, "Hey, you ought to read this." And it was on how Europe underdeveloped Africa, and it blew my mind. As I look at my life in terms of the meaning, it is to do the best that you can with the resources that you have. And to me, that's success,
mm.
because you're using to the best of your ability what you have to do what is your mission. And I see my mission in life as working for social justice.
Talk a little about happiness.
Happiness, I've never really looked at the issue of happiness.
Mm,
I've always looked at contentment, because I think happiness is one of those ideals out there that nobody's ever been there, so we don't know what it is, but we think it's something. But I have always felt contentment with what I have. And if that's happiness, then that's okay. But to be contented with what you have, I'm happy with it. I don't know whether that's happiness, but I'm
mm,
happy with it. Uh, in terms of, it's the same thing about peace and calm. Um, Happiness and peace and perfection, all of those things are constructs that I don't know whether they're real or not.
mm,
But I know that calm is real. So when I meditate, I think there are too many things happening in the world for us to be at peace. I mean, you can't be at peace when the world is at war. I mean, the context and content have to be coordinated.
mm.
And if there is no world peace, there can be no individual peace. But I can be calm amidst the chaos of the world. So I look for things like contentment, calmness. Those are the things that are real and that I can feel. I can feel the calm. I can feel the contentment.
Let's think about advice you'd want to pass on to younger men or to future generation. What would you wish for younger men to understand about words or ideas such as love, money, purpose, taking care of themselves and taking care of others? You know, you have lived a long life. You've been an activist. You have championed the interest of others as you have taken care of yourself. How do you want to encourage or advise young men about all these things: love, money, purpose, and self-care?
I guess I'd have to really use myself as a personal example. Um, if I were advising me as a younger person, I would say that the first thing that I would feel was necessary was to get right with myself. To, as Whitney would say, know who you are. Knowing who you are means accepting who you are and loving who you are. Because I don't believe it's possible to love other people if you don't love yours. If you have no love for yourself, you can't give it to anybody else. Can't give what you don't have.
Mm.
So I would say start with self, whether it's self-reflection, self-development, or whatever. And however one gets that, whether one gets that through religion, through development practice, or whatever, to work on that, and then try in working on that to determine what is true for you. You know, what is your truth? Because the only thing that I believe we can give to other people is what we perceive as being true for us. And it might not be true for them.
Mm-hmm.
And the important thing there is that you have to follow that truth. I had to follow that truth, even when there was opposition. When my committee was saying to me, we're not going to approve you studying Black people. And I had to tell them that I'd contacted Jane Goodall, and Jane Goodall had used participant observation to study the apes and chimpanzees, and she had gotten a PhD from Cambridge.
Mm-hmm.
And she said that it was proper to study Black people in a movement as a participant observationist. And that's when they allowed me to do the study. But it was because I thought that was truth for me. And
Right.
I was unwilling to give that up because, as my grandma used to say, everybody has a hill on which they have to die. And when you know in your heart of hearts that it's true for you, then you die on that hill, you know? Well, as my uncle used to say, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything, you know? So you got to stand for something. And I would say that to young people, that they have to stand for something. They have to build their character around some values, which they're willing to die for.
So as we kind of get to like the closing story here, um, if you could preserve one story, one message for those who will come after you, just looking straight in this camera and this recorder and saying it, what would it be? What's the one um, prevailing story or message you'd want to make sure that people got from this conversation?
Well, first of all, I would want someone to understand that you are no better or no worse than anyone on this earth, and that the best thing that you can do in your life is being true to yourself and doing the very best that you can with the resources that you have every time you get the chance. That practicing excellence is really kind of easy because so few people are trying to get there, you know? Uh, and and that living for ourselves as we live for others is the best thing that we can do. I don't think you can live for others before you live for yourself.
That's a awesome point to make. So let me ask you, what are some names that you definitely want to be spoken of and to be remembered as a part of this conversation? Just some names of people unsung, even though they might be, or you mentioned people like Whitney Young, who is known all over. But what are some names? And as I say, they can be the Whitney Youngs of this world, but they could also be unsung that you want to speak their truth by mentioning them and that they be remembered because they have been so influential to you.
Well, I grew up with some of those, Martin Luther King Jr., we were in the same neighborhood, although he was 3 years older. I grew up with AD, his younger brother. But I think that the people, Lillian Collins, for example, nobody ever will know who Lillian Collins was, but she was instrumental in my life because she told me how to remain cool and in situations of chaos. And I met many, and had to really listen to her. Don Hollowell, I think, is a guy. I don't know whether he didn't get the national attention that Whitney got, but he was just as important because he was one of the people who arranged the sit-ins and the ride-alongs in Atlanta when I was there. I think Diane Priestley, who was a civil rights freedom writer. Kwame Nkrumah. I mean, Jomo Kenyatta.
Black nationalist, African freedom
You
fighters.
gotta. The freedom fighters. Marcus Garvey.
Mr. Self-Reliance.
Yeah, self-reliance and the first Black nationalist movement in this country. W.B. Du Bois, who was the intellectual genius, who did the first study of Atlanta as a sociologist. I'd Booker T. Washington. Hell, even though he was, I call it an accommodationist, the fact that he would be the reason that thousands of schools were built. He compromised to build them, but it got people on that first step of education. Mary McLeod Bethune, I think Harriet Tubman, that's the mother of all of us. We have to remember her. Frederick Douglass is my idol from ever, I think that reading the lives of these people gives you some idea of what you can do and what is possible under the odds. And if their odds were greater, then we have no reason for not trying.
When you think of this one deeply, is there anything you have never said out loud that you'd want to be documented? Something you have never said out loud, but you know what? Now that I'm speaking in this microphone, let me say it.
I've said so many things out loud, many of which have gotten me into trouble too. Maybe that's the problem. I've never held back on it. Rather, and it gets me into trouble. I think there are some things that I have said that I think ought to be emphasized, and that is to always give your best, because getting in the habit of giving your best brings out the best in you. I don't think I've ever said that, but it's been my experience that by focusing on the best bubbles up to the top. I mean, it's the mind and body work together. And that if you can get your mind in a position where it really believes, it gets that belief into the will. And I think the will is the most powerful force that we have within us. And if you can get that belief, that feeling into your will so that you become obsessed with it and you try to perform your best every time, it becomes easier to perform your best.
Awesome. So as we close this out, I'm going to come at you with some rapid fire prompt. I say it and you just respond. No deep thought necessary to do this, but a smell that takes you back.
Mm. The time just before it rains, just before the rain hits the ground, there's a fresh smell that takes me back to my childhood.
A song that carried you through.
Oh, my mother's favorite. My mother was a practicing Christian too, and her favorite was "Jesus Will Carry You Through."
A time you changed your mind on something big.
Oh, on education, I changed my mind on what I wanted to be because I wanted to help people rather than make money.
A mentor that you still hear in your head.
Whitney Young. I hear him all the time. Yeah.
A regret you have made peace with.
I guess that I didn't stay at the university longer.
A photo you wish everyone else could see, and why?
Well, there is a photograph that I have of me at a conference, and I am looking at Nora, at the presenter, and the feeling that I get from that photo is that what is being said is BS. And I am sitting there wondering how could this, it's stunning. It's a subtle, astonished photo because it reveals what needs to be said without saying it.
Mm, mm. Well, Alex, this has been wonderful. I thank you for taking the time to share your story. And so I'm just going to end with you saying anything that's on your mind that you do not mind the world hearing from Alex Norman.
Well, I think one of the things I have learned is that you never retire from life. That retirement means you just shift from one venue to another. And I have redefined retirement at least 3 or 4 times in my life. And I find that I am doing now what I have always done. It's just that I'm using a different platform for doing it. So I'm still the activist that I've always been, even in '94.
Awesome. All right.